What's up, everybody? Welcome to the video. We're going to my core plays for week 9 of the NFL season on DraftKings and FanDuel. If you enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and let's dive right into it. And as always, if you like anything you see on the screen behind me, it's available completely free for a week over my Patreon if you want to check it out. Links down below in the description or the pinned comment. But projections for DraftKings and FanDuel, ownership projections, my optimizer, all the data you'd ever need, color code nice and neat, so it's quite easy to follow. And I do cover the NBA every single day in a very similar fashion. So if you want to check it out, come in. Love to have you. Also got my Discord community. And if you like it, you can stay. If not, tell me to kick rocks. I don't care. Let's dive into it. And as always, we will start with the quarterback position. And I want to tell you right now, this slate sucks. There is like no good games on here. We do have Philly and Dallas, which I guess is a pretty good game. That's like the one I'm looking forward to. But outside of that, all the good games are on primetime this week. We have the Germany game at 9:30 a.m., the Chiefs and the Dolphins, potentially one of the best games of the year, and they ship it off to another country. Go figure. Then we have the Sunday night game with the Bills and the Bengals. That should be a banger. Then we have the Jets and the Chargers, which would be way cooler if Aaron Rodgers was still playing quarterback. But, you know, I'm not going to complain too much because this main slate sucks. But let's start up top with the two studs. We have Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. If you have the money for them, which I'm kind of finding it hard to spend up at the quarterback position. I mean, you can do it, but it's not as easy as I'd like it to be this weekend. But they're definitely the top two options here projection-wise, and really just if you're looking at it, eyeballing it, these are definitely the two that are going to pop off the page the most. They offer a great rushing upside, and while Jalen Hurts offers a ton more rushing upside, both quarterbacks are kind of similar. Now, Jalen Hurts is my number one projected quarterback of the week. It's a tougher matchup versus Dallas, though. 24.75 implied team total here. 3-point favorites at home, but Dallas is pretty tough versus quarterbacks. They're ranking third versus the position this year, allowing less than 200 passing yards per game. But Jalen Hurts, he has been incredible through the air. He's been incredible on the ground this season. I have zero complaints with Jalen Hurts. He's one of the safest options with one of the highest ceilings week in, week out. He basically did nothing on the ground last week and still had right around 30 fantasy points. And usually we play Jalen Hurts just because of what he can do on the ground, and then anything he does with the air is icing on the cake. Well, he has been doing both this season, and A.J. Brown has taken him to another level, so he is fine in all formats for me. And Lamar Jackson, a softer matchup versus Seattle Seahawks. They're ranking 19th versus quarterbacks this year, and he does offer very similar rushing upside, nearly 50 yards per game, over half a rushing touchdown with the QBR of 101 so far this season, which is pretty darn good. Now, only 220 passing yards per game, so we're kind of relying on the ground for Lamar Jackson, but as a quarterback, this is a pretty soft spot as they are allowing 260 passing yards per game and a 25-point team total for the Ravens as 5.5-point favorites at home. You can't quite afford the expensive quarterbacks, but you have a couple mid-range options here in Dak Prescott and CJ Stroud. Dak Prescott should have some decent ownership this weekend. We know the Philadelphia Eagles pass defense has been horrendous this season, although their front seven is very good. So if Dak Prescott's going to be under pressure this week, that could cause some issues. And Dak has really not been that great this year. Now, there's been a couple of blowout games which have hindered his performance, but the prior 2 weeks and good matchups on the Rams and the Chargers, he's balled out for around 30 fantasy points in both of those games. And the Eagles are allowing the 5th most points per game to the quarterback position so far this year. The problem is, if you're stacking this game up, whether you use Dak Prescott or Jalen Hurts, the stacking options are pretty expensive in CeeDee Lamb and A.J. Brown. Now, there is secondary options like Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, but even then, they're a little bit pricey. And the Cowboys have some cheaper options in Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup, and Jake Ferguson, but it's not the easiest stack in the world to do. So if you do go that route, just know you probably have to spend down at the running back position this week. And then dropping down to CJ Stroud, pretty good matchup here versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're more of a pass funnel defense. We know they're pretty tough versus the run, but through the air, allowing over 270 passing yards per game, 25th versus quarterbacks, allowing 20.4 fantasy points per game to the position. And CJ Stroud, while the passing yards have gone down, to knock down his average a bit over the past month, still averaging just under 260 passing yards, 1.3 passing touchdowns, not turning the ball over too much. And we did finally crack the 60% completion percentage threshold. He was in the 50s, so we'll give him a shout out for that. And it's really easy to stack this game up. Use Nico Collins, Tank Dell, run it back with a guy like Chris Evans, Mike Godwin. You know, I was going to edit that out, but it's kind of just funny. I just mixed those names up that bad. But I think you know what I mean. And then if you're really hurting for cash here and you need to spend down at the quarterback position, we have Derek Carr and Deshaun Watson, who just got announced as the starter. Now, I know I'm a Browns fan. I'm not trying to be biased here, but it's a really good spot versus the Arizona Cardinals. We're currently ranking 24th versus quarterbacks, and this is a super easy stack to make. So you have Watson is below 6K. You have Amari Cooper, who's cheap, I believe in the low 6K range, maybe upper 5K. David Njoku's cheap in the 3K range. Run it back with a guy like Trey McBride or Marquise Brown. That's a really cheap stack, and you can build it around guys like Alvin Kamara, maybe even an A.J. Brown, a CeeDee Lamb, whoever you want it to be. So just a possibility this weekend. It's a plus matchup. I know last time he started, he lasted 5 pass attempts and nearly 2 of those were picked, and then he guess he got a concussion for a little bit. He got cleared, then just didn't come back in because his arm wasn't ready. So hopefully he's good to go now. If it is, I mean, this is a really cheap price point for Deshaun Watson. And last time we saw him fully healthy before the shoulder issue was versus Tennessee. He was like 30 for 35, and they gained 300 yards and a couple of touchdowns. So we know the upside is there in him. And we have a late addition here, Mac Jones. It's just the if you hate yourself play here. He's below 5K, $4,900, averaging 200 yards and a passing touchdown per game this year. But this is about the best matchup you could ask for as a quarterback. The Washington Commanders' pass defense is dreadful. They just traded away Chase Young as well, which just hurts their overall defense. I mean, second most points per game in the position, 270 passing yards, 2.25 passing touchdowns. If there is ever a spot to play Mac Jones, it's right now, and obviously the stacking options are very, very cheap. All right, so moving over to our build here, I am going to go with Derek Carr, because I said I would do it earlier in the week. I did have a Dak Prescott build, but I'll stay true to my word. Derek Carr, come on down. You have currently made a core play build lineup. Now, don't copy and paste this, guys. I am not saying I'm going to use it. I am simply going through my process that I use every single week when I'm building single entry / 3 max type builds, where I want a quarterback paired with 2 pass catching options. I want a run back option, and that is simple as that. You can use the same technique / process on your own favorite plays. So don't think like this is the lineup I'm running in all my contests this week. Moving on to our ball carriers, not a big list this weekend, but I think we have a nice solid condensed group of running backs that I am decently confident in this week, or at least they draw themselves some pretty good matchups. And number one for me is Alvin Kamara, $8,100 on DK, $9,200 over on FanDuel. He is pretty much in the dream spot. He will check every single box. So I'm just going to put some fingers up on stuff that he checks off for me. High implied team total at nearly 25, 8.5 point favorites. They're playing at home. It's one of the highest implied team totals of the week. He is one of the most talented running backs in football. He sees extreme passing game work, and he gets a lot of work on the ground as well. So I am not sure what you want outside of a running back. Oh, and plus, it's a great matchup. And Austin Eckler, who's a very similar styled running back to Alvin Kamara, just piece them together. So it's like 9 things that he checks off for me. So the only reason I would say you're probably not playing Kamara is because of the pricing. So if you go with an expensive quarterback wide receiver stack, it's going to be kind of tough to fit in a guy like Alvin Kamara. So that's the only downside there. But I mean, I don't really see any reason not to like him. He's seeing nearly 9 targets per game. It's over a 22% target share, 45 receiving yards, and also 17 plus carries each and every single week, at least on average. Now, he hasn't been incredibly efficient this season in that Saints offense, but when you get that kind of volume, it doesn't really matter. And a lot of the way they run the ball is just check offs to Alvin Kamara. So you can pair him with Derek Carr. It's not my preferred thing to do, but it's not like it's a bad correlation play. I just prefer getting to the wide receivers more. Saquon Barkley at $7,900. He is also a guy that gets a ton of volume. He saw 41 opportunities last week, which I don't think will happen again, especially with Daniel Jones back, because Tyrod Taylor got hurt. I believe Tommy DeVito is the guy that came in, and he finished the game with -1 passing yards. We did better on the couch last weekend, guys. And they also lost Darren Waller, and Darren Waller's going to be out for this game. So really, the only weapon here is Saquon Barkley. Now, Daniel Jones will run the ball, so that'll probably take away a little bit from Saquon, but obviously it's a good matchup versus the Raiders. They just got destroyed by Jahmyr Gibbs. They're currently allowing the 5th most points in the running back position. Only concern here is inefficiency from Saquon Barkley. But similar to Kamara, they can make that up with volume. But a really low implied team total here of 18, and I do think the Giants will struggle a bit, but I mean, Saquon should get enough volume where it won't matter too much. Now, I'm not saying I love Saquon, but if you're just looking for running backs with safe volume, I mean, Kamara, Barkley, check your boxes there. And Josh Jacobs is kind of in that same exact group where he's not been super efficient this season, but he's getting a ton of volume. Now, I'm not saying he's on the same level as a guy like Alvin Kamara, but he's still seeing 16 plus carries per game, 5 targets, which is nearly a 17% target share. Awful offense, though. Jimmy G is getting benched, so maybe AOC will give them some life. Devontae Adams is sure hoping so because he is miserable over there in Las Vegas, it seems, especially after last week. 19.5 implied team total. They're 1.5 point favorites at home. And it's a really good matchup versus the Giants as they're currently ranking 22nd versus opposing running backs, laying over 120 rushing yards per game. So Jacobs, another fine volume play here. Jonathan Taylor, $6,400. So finally a guy that's not really in that same category. We know the talent is extreme here. The problem is the volume hasn't been as high. Now, we have seen since he returned, his snaps have increased each and every single week. We got up to around 60% last weekend. The other issue is that Zach Moss is not going anywhere. It seems like this is going to be a pretty split backfield, probably more so 60-40 in Taylor's favor. I'd like to see it 70-30. Maybe that happens this weekend since the snaps have been increasing. But this is the best matchup you can ask for almost for a running back. The Carolina Panthers are allowing the 2nd most points per game and over 130 rushing yards per game as well. 23-point implied team total for the Indianapolis Colts. So there should be enough here for both Taylor and Moss to eat. but Taylor would be my preferred option here. And he's just under 5 yards per carry this season as well. So if we can get close to 15 carries and hopefully a handful of targets, I'll even take a couple. I mean, $6,400, it's a pretty good price tag over on DraftKings compared to FanDuel to fit Taylor in. Bijan Robinson at $6,100, super cheap. We know he's one of the more talented backs in the entire NFL. He's a first-round pick, a high first-round pick for a reason. The problem is Arthur Smith and the Falcons are just really weird with their usage. There's no Drake London this week, which I'm not really sure directly affects Bijan Robinson, but Desmond Ridder is also out as well. But if we can get 15 carries out of Bijan, which I know the averages would say that's not happening this year. He did play a couple snaps in that one game just like a little bit ago because he had that headache, so it's going to skew the stats a little bit, but he's still seeing like 11, 15, right in that range carries per game this season, but over 5 yards per carry, and also seeing nearly 5 targets per game, which is nice. That boosts the floor up. He's really cheap. Minnesota has been a lot better versus the run they have been versus the pass, but I still think this price point on Bijan, as talented as he is going to put him in play. Jerome Ford, $5,300. It seems like Kareem Hunt's carving out more of a role in this offense, especially after last week. Although keep in mind, Ford did come in very iffy to start. I still think he's the better back in this offense. He's at 4.4 yards per carry on the season. So if he's going to be the main back here, which is my assumption, he should be able to outsnap, outtouch Kareem Hunt, but it's going to be a bit of a split backfield here, kind of similar to what we see with Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss. But it's such a good matchup versus the Cardinals. I think there's enough room for both of these guys to put up decent fantasy days. And like I said, it's a really good spot. They're 8.5 point favorites. They're playing at home, 23.5 implied team total. They're getting Deshaun Watson back, so they should have to respect the pass game a little bit more. And the Cardinals are currently allowing the 4th most points per game to running backs. So Jerome Ford, I think, is viable this week, but probably only for tournaments. And if you're looking for the cheap cash game QB this week, it's probably going to be Chuba Hubbard here at $5,000. They just named him the starting running back, so no more Miles Sanders, although it's not like Hubbard's going to get the 100% of the workload. That's just not what happens in this day and age. But assuming he gets 15 plus touches in this matchup versus the Colts, who are currently 27 versus running backs, that's a good enough volume for me to have a ton of interest. And if you're playing cash games, I think he's fine there as well. All right, so we got 2 RB slots to fill out. I think Chuba Hubbard is going to be the first one we plug in at $5,000. It's just going to be a good volume roll. It's a great matchup. And I like Jonathan Taylor as well on the flip side of this game, but I don't really want to stack it up with both running backs in the same game for this specific build. So if I don't go to the Jonathan Taylor route, who I love this week, one of my favorite plays overall, I could just save a couple bucks to go with Bijan. I don't love how they use him in the offense, but if we can get 15 touches here, hopefully a couple of targets. He had 5 last week. Somehow did not catch any as a running back. I'm not really sure how that worked. I did not watch the Falcons game. I don't want to watch a Falcons game, but hopefully with Taylor Heinicke under center, we can figure something out. And as per usual, long list of viable wide receivers like we do every single week. We're even missing some studs this week on the main slate, but we still have a long list of options that look good, whether you want to go up top, in the middle, or down low. Now, down low is not great this week, but there's a couple stragglers that do look pretty solid. But we can make this way more simple and less difficult than it needs to be, because the quarterback you pick gives you the direction of your lineup. If you are someone that played C.J. Stroud, Nico Collins, Hank Dell, very viable options for your build. And you have to go with at least one of them. You have to get a pass catcher with C.J. Stroud, because if you're playing C.J. Stroud, well, he's not getting there himself. He's not running for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns, so you have to pair at least somebody up with him. Now, what I typically do is the 2 pass catchers, 1 run back option. The problem for my specific build, my run back options are Chicago Bears players. I don't want to play in the Chicago Bears on this slate, so we might break the rules for once. I've not done that yet this year. We might break the rules and not do a run back option this week. You don't have to force it if it doesn't make a ton of sense, because I don't really want to play DJ Moore in this spot. There's just many other ways I can go. So sometimes you can bend the rules if it makes sense, which I think it makes sense to this weekend. But if you have Jalen Hurts, you're going in that A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, CeeDee Lamb direction. So just keep that in mind when you pick a quarterback. It's already kind of locking in 2-ish, 3 spots in your build already if you're building correctly for tournaments. So obviously A.J. Brown, I mean, the dude's been a stud. I think it's like, 6-7 straight games with 120 plus yards. Like, he is killing it. Tough matchup versus Dallas, but I mean, obviously if you're playing Hurts, you got to find a way to get either Brown or Devontae Smith in. CeeDee Lamb, super soft matchup versus the Eagles pass defense. They are allowing the most points per game to the wide receiver position so far. Got shredded by Sam Howell last week. Mike Evans is fine in a CJ Stroud stack if you want to run it back with him. Michael Pittman, I'm not in love with the Colts passing attack here. I like the run game more. The Panthers have actually been a lot tougher versus the pass than they have versus the run this season, but I'm still fine with Pittman just based off the volume that he gets at that price point. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, that's how you pronounce his name, and Michael Thomas. Like, those are 2 of those 3. Definitely, I think, got a good shot of making my lineup here If you want to look at guys like Amari Cooper, the Deshaun Watson stack, running back with a guy like Marquise Brown, I'm fine with that as well. Zay Flowers with Lamar Jackson. I'm trying to skip around a little bit here because I don't want to break down every single matchup. Just really comes down to your quarterback. Like, some people like to dive into wide receiver cornerback matchups and get a little bit too nitty gritty for me. I don't care about that stuff. I mean, a lot of times, whether it's a bad matchup or not, a good enough wide receiver can get the job done anyway. And a lot of times, you're not going to see the same corner the entire game when there's broken plays and there's just way too much that can happen. They care about one specific matchup for an entire 60 minutes of a football game. I mean, hey, if that's you, go for it if it works for you, but that is not something I've ever cared about, and they've had some pretty solid success in NFL. Now, a couple of cheap plays that I do like that you can play as one-offs because you can't stack your entire lineup up. I mean, Josh Downs, he sees significant targets for his price tag every week. That's going to make him viable. Nearly 7 targets per game this year, 21% target share, coming off a 9-target game. If you can't quite get the Pittman, you like the Colts this week, Downs is a fine option. Already talked about the 2 Saints players. Demario Douglas, I think, is one of the better one-off cheap options for cash games this week. And if you're also going with the extremely ugly, slimy, vile Mac Jones stack this week, he's $4,100. You have Demario Douglas, who should be the main wide receiver here with Kendrick Bourne tearing his ACL. He's $4,000, and like I said, the Commanders are awful versus the pass this season. And then Wan'Dale Robinson with no Darren Waller. The ball's going to go somewhere in this offense, and I know the Giants have like 30 wide receivers, but Robinson's usually a nice safety valve in this offense, and usually a safe bet to get around 4 to 5 catches. And back to our lineup, let's make this simple here. So we have Derek Carr. Let's plug in Chris Olave. I like him a lot this week. One of my favorite receivers in the slate. Now, I realize the production hasn't exactly been there, but the opportunity 100% has been. 10 targets, 15, 9 targets. He's one of the league leaders in air yards so far this season. Market share of the team's air yards is massive as well. At some point, him and Derek Carr are going to connect. It's been off this season, and there's been some really, really bad weeks. But such a good matchup versus Chicago, I just cannot pass that up. We're going to plug in Chris Olave. I refuse to pair Derek Carr with Taysom Hill, even though it could possibly work out, but I think they steal each other's points more than it actually works out. So let's just plug in Michael Thomas, gets consistent targets, and while he doesn't have as much upside as Chris Olave, he has been decently consistent so far this year. And I don't really want to do it with T-Bag under center, but just to do my specific builds that I do every single week, let's just stay consistent here. We're going to plug in DJ Moore as the run back option. I don't think you have to do it this week. I don't really want to, but let's just try it out for now. In tight ends this week, as you can see, this is a long list. I think it's the longest list I've ever had at tight end. Now, a lot of it just comes down to like your stacks, so they can be additional stacking options, or really just throwing whoever fits at the last fitter just as a one-off. I don't really have a strong preference on any of these guys. I feel like TJ Hawkinson might end up being the cash tight end this week at that price point for $200. It's really cheap for a guy that's so involved in the offense. Now, I know Kirk Cousins is no longer here, which is very unfortunate. Jaron Hall, we'll see what happens with him, but $5,200, he is projecting pretty well for me, although maybe that's just some leftover Kirk Cousins residue. I'm not really sure. Andrews would be the preferred option if you had the money for him, or if you're playing Lamar, you kind of have to pair those two together. Goddard would be fine with Jalen Hurts or just Cowboy Eagle stacks in general. Taysom Hill is a big wild card. Now, it's never going to feel good rostering the guy, but he does a little bit of everything. He has these really poor games if he doesn't get to the end zone or just doesn't get enough carries on the ground. But then he has these big games, which you've actually seen the prior 3 weeks. 12 points versus the Houston Texans, 16 points versus the Jaguars, and last week, 22.5 points versus Indianapolis Colts at 9 carries, 63 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. There's no other tight end on this slate that is going to have the potential to get 5+ carries, and Taysom Hill offers you that. And he gets goal line carries as well. And he can go out there and catch some passes, and he can throw a random pass or two. Now, he makes 0 sense in a Derek Carr build just because it just negatively correlate. Because if they take Derek Carr out of the game, that's not points I can get from Taysom Hill and Derek Carr at the same time. You know what I mean? Because they're probably not going to get a receiving touchdown together. It'd be weird, but I guess it's possible. So just know Taysom Hill, a lot of downside, but there's also a lot of upside as well that no other tight end can offer you. It's just good luck guessing. You know, it's just one of the games where it's going to be really hard to figure out when to play Taysom Hill. Anyway, Dalton Schultz, if you're doing CJ Stroud, he's viable, runs a lot of routes, 5 targets per game, 17% target share, like it's all right. Kyle Pitts, there's no Drake London this week, so we could see increased targets for Kyle Pitts. I know they don't play the exact same position or anything, but on the season, he has a 32% market share of the team's air yards and a 50% weighted opportunity share. We have a new quarterback this week in Taylor Heineke, who has to be a little bit better than Desmond Ridder throwing the football, so $4,100. I'm willing to take a chance versus a bad pass defense in the Minnesota Vikings. Ferguson runs a ton of routes. He's a cheap option with Dak Prescott. And Njoku has Deshaun Watson back, and even with PJ Walker last week, Njoku actually put up a pretty good game. Kind of tough matchup versus the Cardinals as a tight end, but I don't try to care too much about matchups when it comes to tight ends. Just if they're part of a stack, it's fine. And then Trey McBride, 14 targets last week. Now, the Browns have been so stiff versus tight ends, it honestly kind of scares me. They were allowing 19 yards per game, 5.9 points, which is obviously the fewest, and it's funny, the Cardinals are allowing the second fewest. So maybe not the best matchups in this game for tight ends, but they are cheap enough and they will see volume. I don't think McBride will get 14 targets again. Plus, we have a new quarterback this week. It's not going to be Josh Dobbs. But we know the tight end position in this offense has been heavily used. And you guys know how defense works for me. I scroll all the way down, look for the first viable defense or two, and then I call it a day. The Giants are the cheapest defense on the slate. I got them projected for 7.5 points. That's 3.2x value. Low over-under in that game. Low implied team total against them. They're on the road. But, I mean, you're just trying to save money. I'm fine with that. Packers are fine, especially if Matthew Stafford's out. The Patriots defense versus Washington, I don't love it, but they don't project poorly for me. And then if you have the money, obviously the guys like the Ravens and the Browns and the Saints look good, but I don't spend up for defense. All right, so let's finish this lineup off. It's not the prettiest looking thing in the world. Like I said, guys, don't copy and paste this. Apply your own favorite plays. I'm probably not going to use this. I'm just trying to use players we talked about and then put them in a lineup and try to make it make sense for a tournament build. Because in tournaments, you can play stupid plays like Derek Carr. All right, so we have 3 spots left, and we have a decent chunk of salary. Let's just plug in the cheapest defense possible. Giants defense is fine, $2,300 this week. We have 2 spots, tight end in flex, and we have $7,000 per player. So honestly, we could probably play whoever we wanted. If you wanted to play Mark Andrews, you could certainly do that. You're that Devontae Smith, Kenneth Walker, Chris Godwin range, which honestly doesn't look super appealing. If you wanted to go a little bit cheaper with TJ Hawkinson, I just think he's a little bit too cheap. I know it's not Kirk Cousins, but Jaron Hall's got to throw the ball somewhere, and I feel like Hawkinson's probably the easiest way to do it. As a safety valve. And if you do that, you have nearly $9,000 and you can play whoever you want. You can play AJ Brown, Cooper Kupp, CeeDee Lamb. I love CeeDee Lamb this week. The Eagles are so bad versus wide receivers. So if you just went that route, you wanted to upgrade your defense a little bit maybe. You got $2,900 left. You could throw in the Patriots if you wanted, but leave it blank. But let's just go through the build here. So we have Derek Carr double stacked with Chris Olave and Michael Thomas. It's a Ram back with DJ Moore. You have Chuba Hubbard and Brian Robinson at running back. You have CeeDee Lamb in the flex spot, and then play whoever the heck you want at defense. It makes sense rules-wise. It's not the prettiest looking thing, but I think it's fine. If you don't want to do the run back option with DJ Moore, you could play, well, let's just plug in our cheap defense really quick. So we have $6,500 left. Amari Cooper, I like. Nico Collins, Zay Flowers, all really solid options right there. So don't feel like you have to be pigeonholed in a guy like DJ Moore's run back option if it doesn't always make the most sense. Now, I like it typically for tournaments, but the Bears offense is obviously very tough to trust. And as always, I want to give you guys a preview of the optimizer, what it likes. Now it's Friday, so a lot can change by then, especially ownership projection wise. Obviously, if guys get rolled in or out or not. But I just put a couple of settings on here, a little bit of randomness and some stacking settings that are very simple, just to give you guys an example of what to look for this week. So let's look at the builds that we're building as we were talking. And if we open up the players tab, yeah. So it loves Alvin Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, Chuba Hubbard, Jerome Ford. Those running backs are just getting GM'd in this weekend. Patriots defense really popping up. But Hawkinson, even with Jaron Hall at quarterback, Terry McLaurin. Probably in the run back options, because I think Mac Jones is populating quite a bit. Because I know my projections actually had him as one of the better value quarterbacks of the week. Yeah, we see Mac Jones there 14% of the time. So yeah, Terry McLaurin's probably like the one run back option we're getting from Washington there. But I'm not really too surprised at who the projections are liking individually. All guys that we did talk about, the teams that it likes, the Saints, the Patriots, although a lot of that can be defense and Demario Douglas. Also a little bit of Mac Jones. So actually, I guess the Patriots aren't looking too bad this week because of the matchup. But then Panthers, Colts, Browns, Washington. It's just such an ugly week when you see these teams populating so much. Game stacks, Carolina, Indy, New Orleans, Chicago, New England, Washington. So yeah, it makes sense to me. Philly, Dallas is just a little bit lower because of the price tags, but I do like them. Overall, you just have to sacrifice a little bit in your builds to make that work. But hopefully this gives you guys an idea of what other people are going to be on, because I can't imagine my projections will be too far off. So this should give you a nice landscape view of how ownership should at least be for the slate. Now it's Friday, like I said, so a lot can change until then. But as of right now, here's an early look. That's all I got for today's video. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel on your way out. Don't forget to check out Prize Picks and Underdog. Use promo code CPEN. Give that deposit match bonus up to $100. But I wish you all the best of luck this week. And if you have any questions, leave them down below. But I'll see y'all next time.